hey, if this business is going to be what we really want it to be, a VIP lounge is nothing in terms of cost, in terms of CapEx. It's nothing. If it doesn't work, I don't even want to be here if it doesn't work. 99% of the investors were not supportive.
I think this is founder mode versus Brian. Manager mode. Manager mode would be like, okay, investor, you know better. Founder mode would be like, hey, you know what? This is my company. And I'm going to do it because I believe in it.
Everything was collapsing, and then there's a lot of cash, and then there's crisis. There are two sides of the story. I can say almost died.
You got to stay alive long enough to get lucky.
That's it, 100%.
Lucas and I worked together. Lucas joined early at VivaReal back in 2012 and led the expansion of the business, became the CEO of the company, and we worked together on the merger with Zap and then selling the company to OLX. So how long ago after that did you jump into Nomad?
Similar to you, even before the sale of the company.
Exactly. Yeah. You were already there in the conversations. You had chats with Patrick, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So Monashis, which was the firm that introduced us.
Yep.
Also reconnected me to Patrick. So Patrick was one of the. So he was the founder CEO at iFood, and iFood back in the day, like 2012, very few startups were doing SMB sales, right? So he was on one of those who were like hiring teams and leading sales efforts all over Brazil. So I had met him, and we had exchanged notes in the past. But then Monashis reconnected us in mid 20.
That's amazing, and you know, you've been now part of like multiple journeys here, scaling. You know, you're part of Groupon in the early days, which was like a real. People don't realize that business was like scaling crazy, and you had to grow the team, and then when you came to Viva, like similar story, like we didn't have a lot of infrastructure in the team side, and you expanded quite a bit. And then with Nomad, joined really early, and then you've scaled that business. When you look back at these three opportunities to scale a business, a lot of times there's like all these like best practices. Someone's like, oh, this is how you scale a business. What's one thing that just like stays the same, that doesn't alter?
One that has not changed, customer obsession, right? Like it's still fundamental. Like the company, as you scale successfully, you will always be, no matter when in the journey, you have to be obsessed with the customer. No one is going to say it doesn't make sense. Those that are the companies that are the most successful are probably those that never lose sight of solving real problems for their customers, regardless of market trends, crisis, growth pressures, everything. So I think that's the one. Like the customer obsession is. It used to be, in our case, there was the B2B2C structure. And in our case, we focused on agents and brokers, right? And we were trying to do everything for them, and we put them at the center. And the whole B2B marketing was around them as well. The events, the content strategy, it was all about them. And I think here in our case, we do in a different company, different setting, different everything. But I think it's very similar. That's a very easy one.
It's interesting because there was that Paul Graham article on founder mode versus manager mode, right? And it's interesting because I got interviewed recently in Valor. Pipeline interviewed me and a couple other investors. And I talked a little bit. One of my responses was like, the founder mode doesn't necessarily mean that it's a founder, that you have to, like, only founders can be in founder mode. Because I gave the example of you. There's a bunch of other examples, right? Like Elon Musk was not the founder of Tesla. When you think about customer obsession, the root of this question of founder mode versus manager mode, do you think that as companies scale and get bigger, they lose sight of the customer and they get overly focused on like process and things that theoretically should be getting them to the next phase? Because it kind of took the internet by storm for like a week, right? Where do you think the root of that discussion came from? And how have you observed from your perspective of the manager mode versus founder mode, and how does it relate to this whole customer piece?
I have multiple conflicting thoughts about that. When I think about founder mode, the obsession, I think, is kind of one potential word that could replace or exemplify what a founder mode is. Like it's you're gonna do it no matter what. It's relentless, right? Like that's the journey. If things are breaking, you're gonna be there no matter what. So I think that's kind of the one thing that I agree 100% in the argument in the article, and it is this obsession, this level of the obsession. I think it's very hard for people who are not founder, executive, very senior level to. I think it's very hard for other people to understand and to have the drive to impact as a founder can, right? I remember Brian Chesky talking about the 2020 crisis, and I think, and it was when I started listening to him and learning about his journey. It was crazy. The Airbnb was like multi-billion-dollar company, and then there's COVID. They were about to IPO, and then they lose, I don't know, 80% of their revenue. And then a few months later, everything goes back up and they list. And it's crazy. Who could ever have done that, right? There's kind of a emotional connection, almost like a DNA connection that person, that individual has with the firm that is a force of nature. And you can't argue that he does not have the best of the intentions, and that if something like that happens again, COVID, a crisis of such a magnitude, it does require this crazy individual who's going to do whatever it takes for him to make the company go back to the growth path and to list. It's crazy. So the founder mode reflection for me is it's about obsession. It's about a irrational drive that very few people have. But having said that, I don't think a one size fits all. I don't think it's a one size fits all principle. For example, the founder part of the word, like, what is a founder? You mentioned Elon Musk, right? Like, here we have this conflict. Am I a founder or not? I joined before the company was even launched. So am I or not? Like, I'm one of the largest shareholders of the company. So I don't know. We at times say we are. At times I just avoid talking about it. But then, is it a founder mode? No, it's an obsession mode. That's how I think about it. I think I had some of those traits back in the day as a head of sales, and
I confirm.
And by the way, I'm not proud of some of my behaviors at all. We've talked a lot about that. Maybe let me go back to your first question. It's one of the mantras that maybe I think they're obsolete. I remember you used to say, hire smart people and leave them alone. I think it works well when you have crazy people who are obsessed. Otherwise, it will probably not work, right? If I hadn't been given that autonomy back in the day at VivaReal, maybe I wouldn't have stayed for almost a decade. But again, that opens the door to a contradiction, which is, does that mean the company wouldn't have grown? You wouldn't have sold the business for about 3 billion reals? Not necessarily. The path could have been different. It would have been different, but maybe even better, right? We'll never know. But the point is, in some cases, even though someone might be incredibly smart and talented, they might not be the right fit for that particular moment, that particular environment, and maybe that person doesn't have the founder obsession. So, it's a long discussion. Everyone is talking about it, right? Like, there are multiple angles, and
I really like the obsession. I think that rings true to me, and I was lucky that I partnered with people that were smart and obsessed. Otherwise, really would have limited our growth. And I got interviewed, and I was like, how do I really think about this? And I'm in the camp of like, people don't need to be a founder in order to have an obsession. There's multiple examples of that. I mean, you look at Dara from Uber, right? I don't know
Exactly.
what his obsession is like, but all I know is the stock price is way up from Uber. And then you could always make the argument, well, what if Travis had stayed in? Would it be bigger? There's some value in kind of reflecting on these things.
I
Yeah,
remember when we were working on the succession, one of the examples that we used was Howard Schultz from Starbucks as well, right? Like this guy, he's a synonym with Starbucks, right? Like
totally. You
that
can't
are,
think of Starbucks without thinking about him and what he was.
yep,
And he bought this little coffee company, right? Or like joined the little coffee company that existed prior to
yep,
Starbucks. Yeah, it is a mindset. I think you shared a book with me called The Founder Mentality at one point. I'm not sure if does that ring a bell?
yeah, of course, of
Yeah.
course, yeah. And how do
Yeah,
you create the engine too? And yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And the
growth
founders.
levers.
So it sounds like the thing that's obsolete, just smart people that don't have enough drive or obsession.
What I would say is that it's not a one size fits all principle. That's it. So you can apply, but it depends on more, I think, traits of the person. And maybe it's not just smart people, as you said. Maybe it's smart and obsessed. I don't know. I would just not apply that no matter what, regardless of the context. Yeah.
Let's go from A to B, which is a fun way to say going from here or getting there. You have raised a Series B. If you think about post Series A and what needed to happen on the scaling side of the business, in your opinion, what were the fundamental ingredients during that time when you raised that initial capital to kind of start scaling a little bit more and then getting kind of to the next level of operations?
Great. So in our case, the number one reason, it's hard to find another reason. It is the tailwind, right? Post pandemic, our main product was a debit card for Brazilians to use when they were traveling abroad and save on FX spread and taxes. Brazilians were not traveling during the pandemic, and then the gate was open. And with the open gate, Brazilians were forbidden to travel to multiple countries in Europe. Brazilians were facing those 15-day quarantine to enter the US. We had to stay 15 days in Mexico or Dominican Republic, some other countries. But then November the 8th, I remember the date.
After your
The
birthday,
US,
day after your birthday.
exactly, exactly. The day after my birthday, the month, I used to say a few things happen on a few dates. So yes, that specific one I remember. The US lifted the quarantine and then a huge flow of people traveling. So with the more repressed the demand, the bigger the wave, right? And so we surfed the wave. That was it. Of course, we had a product. We had to survive during the pandemic because we had a product that we were confident that when that gate was open, we would have a great opportunity, but we didn't know if we were going to be able to survive until that moment because as we know, we didn't know if it was going to take an additional 6 months, a year. We didn't know. So it was a big bet, but it worked. So that was the one thing. Of course, we had a product, we had a team, multiple things aligned, but that was it. We were able to surf this big wave, and that led us to the Series B. Let me tell something. I don't remember if you were in the room, but we were talking to Nico Sekasi at some point, talking about, I don't know if we were bragging about what we've done at Viva, and he said something like, or about our expansion strategy, and he said something like, we just surfed the wave. Don't forget to say there was a wave there. If that trend didn't happen, like of course of course you were part of that equation, but there was a wave. So
it's about finding the wave and getting on it too. And that's, there's some value there. Sometimes you just fall into the wave and get carried. Sometimes you identify it and go after it. I think that it's always not so clear cut, but yeah, it's a good reminder that it's a good reminder to stay humble.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. In our case, that was it. I was on an interview and a journalist. I was telling the story of Nomad, and the journalist said, "Oh, you're lucky, right? There was the wave." Well, there are two sides of the story. I can say I almost died because we were for over a year waiting for it to be open, and So
you got to stay alive. You got to stay alive long enough to get lucky.
That's it.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question about product surface area and expansion. I'm now back in the driver's seat building a company, right? Fun and extremely painful phase of trying to figure out product market fit, where the entry point on the product is. And we're operating an area with like a lot of different problems. So there's the constant opportunity to, have the temptation of building multiple things because there's multiple problems to solve. When you think about Nomad, you think about the journey, and maybe you can tie together what we did at Viva and what you're doing or what you've done so far at Nomad. I can recall Simon Baker just pounding this into our head. Focus on growing the listings, getting the traffic, vanilla, 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 and then you'll wake up and you'll be sitting on a gold mine. Don't worry too much about depth products until you've got like massive scale. How have you translated some of that advice into Nomad, and at what point does it make sense to build ancillary products and go, kind of more depth in what you're doing?
That's a great question, because even though I agree with it in principle, the focus and the need for you to really get maybe product market fit before you start looking for other products and ancillary opportunities. At the same time, it's hard for you to really draw the line and say, what is the minimum viable product? Like, when should I start exploring potential opportunities that are going to be the future growth levers, right? You have always the trade-off, the short-term, long-term trade-off. So at Viva, it was very clear. It's one of the, of course, we were there, but it's one of the most beautiful examples of focus and being explicit about what we're not going to do. And I remember when you had the list of like very long of list of we're going to do 3 things, right, and not anything else. And the whole strategy was so cohesive. It is all about having listings. If it's listings, it doesn't make sense for us to go after homeowners, because one homeowner on average is going to have 1.001 listing. An average broker is going to have 200 listings. Focus on listings. And what about a home builder? A home builder, a very big one like MRV or Cirella, they're going to have like 200 buildings, maybe thousands of units, but buildings. And buildings are going to be just 200 listings. So let's not focus on them. It's brokers, brokers, brokers. And then that's what we did. And don't focus about monetizing. First step is to validate if there is demand. This is a marketplace. You need supply, you need liquidity, supply and demand. So validate first. And how you're going to validate first? You have to break one side. So focus on having listings. Forget about the demand. Demand, SEO comes afterwards. And then after that, you're going to be monetizing. So it was so beautiful that we could really apply the strategy, right? And it felt so easy at some point. So let's just replicate in every city again and again and again. So it worked really well. And so that playbook is really one of the most beautiful frameworks for you to scale a marketplace, a B2B marketplace. It's incredible. And then Nomad, what is the minimum viable product? We need a few licenses, and we have to build an infrastructure here and there, and we need lawyers, and we need like validation and cross-border transactions. And so the minimum, like it was a lot. When we launched, for us to achieve our vision, of course, we have to start from one angle. We have to find what is the piece here of this big puzzle that is going to be the starting point. And in our case, it was hard. Of course, it's not the only way for us to do it. There could be some other, of course, there were multiple ways. But for us to build the minimum version of our go-to-market product, we wanted to have an FDIC-insured bank account in the US that by itself is one product, a US debit card, which is another product, and a cross-border money transfer solution for you to fund from your Brazilian domestic account, your Nomad US account. Those were three products that by themselves were startups, right? Like Nubank was just a card in the beginning. And then there was Remessa Online here in Brazil doing money transfer. And then you have a bank account that is another product. It could be another startup by itself. And we wanted to do it. So I think other strategies could have worked, but I felt from the beginning that I was failing, that I was like betraying, that I was failing on a principle that I really believed and that worked really well for us. So I felt I was extremely anxious during that process. And it took, during the pandemic, it took over a year, right, for us to have an evidence of success that it's working. So I think it's focus as a guiding principle is probably the best one that you can rely on. Focus. The minimum product you're gonna learn. You're gonna be the best at that specific product with those guardrails. And then, if for whatever reason you think you have to expand a little bit to create value and protect and to align with your strategy, okay, you're going to be compromising on that principle. But as long as you have those boundaries defined, focus on it. And then it's when you're going to get the evidences for, okay, you'll have product market fit, right? The discussion is longer because then, okay, but when do you start building the other products? When do you start exploring the ancillary opportunities, right? Low-hanging fruit is everywhere, and it's much easier to be captured than additional market share in your industry, than getting more out of the existing product. It's not fun for you to go back and let me try again to sell again to the. No, it's much easier for let's just add something here and it's gonna be sold. It's gonna be easy, and it's hard for you to get the organization to focus on the same product again and to improve the existing product, because it's innovation is outside of what you're doing. So it's easier, it's fun, it's better. Everyone wants to do something else. So it's an ongoing challenge for us to manage the organization to keep funding the existing milky cow that is going to be generating cash, and to build what are going to be the next big opportunities. And what's interesting is that most of the cases, you're going to be making other bets and you're going to be building multiple products for you to find what's going to be the next big one that is really going to work and that is going to be having a relevant impact in the business, right? Like just a feature, if it's something small, maybe it does not transform, but what you're really looking for is, okay, Series B, more growth. It's not just something similar that you're going to be adding to the existing portfolio. It could be, but it's usually something that requires trial and error, multiple tests, and then something's going to work. So yeah, it's hard. I don't have a proper framework to understand when it's time to explore the next phase. I think this is kind of an ongoing, at least at Nomad, it has been something from the beginning, like the ongoing pursuit of new opportunities in parallel, and a big conflict between the existing core business and the other business units, and how do you better allocate resources? Yeah, so it's a big challenge.
I would say that one advantage to the current kind of market backdrop is that given that there's kind of less capital available, it breeds focus by naturally, right? I'll share some intimate details with the audience here of like what it was like for us when SoftBank came in, was like plopped down a couple $100 million into the Brazil online real estate market, and we're like, we need to go figure out, one, how we get this money because we don't want it to land in our competitors' hands, and two, what crazy shit can we do with it, right? Like, which is in retrospect is like embarrassingly the wrong focus, and it probably led us astray a little bit. That distracted us, and I take a lot of the responsibility from that. We both didn't really know how to react to that situation because there's no simulation for something like that entering the market and kind of changing things. In retrospect, if we had the extreme discipline during that time, I think that there's a component of us not reinventing ourselves early enough. But at the same time, if you look at what OLX has done with the business today, it's even more bare bones than what we continues the mantra. And it's still from what I understand now, printing money. If you can tune out the noise and just be hyper focused and locked in. So I don't know though. I just don't know if it's not always the right path, maybe there was some things that we had on our roadmap that we could have done, like the rental piece that, Quinto was very successful at, so it's just really hard to know because we're not living in the matrix that I can tell where there's kind of A and B, one pill takes you one direction. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
At one point, I was talking to a fellow co-founder who said, "Yeah, so in the end, you lost, right? You lost. Oh, really? Selling a business in Brazil for 3 billion reals in cash? I don't think we lost. I don't think it was a failure. It was a beautiful journey. And so let's put that in perspective. That's one thing. And then the conversation goes yeah, but Quinto is really focused on the consumer. I agree. And by the way, love the product. And period. It's great what they've done. Everyone agrees. It's not perfect like any product, but yeah, of course, they really transformed the rental experience. Great. In retrospect, I do think that there was an opportunity for us to focus on just doing classifieds, which is what OLX is doing. We could have, before selling the business, we could have accelerated the search for efficiency. We could have so we were almost break even, right? When we sold, we could have accelerated that. We decided not to. We were exploring different things in parallel. We were looking for big levers. And yes, I think we were kind of pushed by investors, by the industry, by multiple stakeholders to consider what was the new trend in real estate globally. Right. So, there's something. There's something here. Let's explore. I think that the two of us and me personally, as I was deeply involved with that iBuyer opportunity in the ops side of the business, I was there. I was looking at the properties, at the committees. I was directly involved, emotionally involved. So when I look back, I think, hey, what a waste of time. We never know if that was going to happen in the end. What a waste of time. And yes, we could have been focusing on the core business and improving and accelerating and creating even more differentiation. Yes. But at the same time, 90% of the business was still focused in terms of resources, in terms of everything, right? So we were still focusing on the core business. And I think that the senior leadership, the two of us and me personally, I think that was the biggest mistake, I think. Hey, forget about this. Focus on, there is a business there. Look at all over the world. And Simon Baker, how much wisdom, right? Forget about it, man. Focus on what you're doing. Look at REA. Look at Rightmove. Look at these people. They're printing money. This is the future for you. Why don't you do this? And
I just Googled,
so obvious.
Rightmove, which has heavy competition from Zoopla and others. Still a $7 billion company.
Exactly.
In UK, Brazil's big. So
REA is probably 10 billion. REA in Australia, and of course they expand to different countries, but out of Australia. So I think it was a successful story. Great, it worked, but it's interesting because I was personally 100% affected by those movements in the industry.
Yeah. It's a reminder of not to get distracted by the competitive landscape and other things if you have a clear vision. Because we talked a lot about execution and what the plan was, and it can throw you off. And you don't want to be driven by the competitive dynamics. You want to be driven by the opportunity, the customer, there's got to be a different kind of motivator for you to. So I
For
think
sure.
that's a good lesson. I'm using Viva a lot because we have that kind of commonality, and we remember, the metrics that we used to monitor, listings and leads, ARPA, average revenue per advertiser, things like that. Some of those shifted over time, but they remained relatively constant. How have the metrics shifted at Nomad? I remember at the very beginning of VivaReal, we were like, the one metric that matters, the OMTM, was just like inventory, because we knew that was the driver for visitors and eyeballs, which would be the driver for revenue eventually. How have the metrics for Nomad changed, and what's on your like short list of things that you look at to see the health of the business, and how has that changed?
Good. So consumer fintech, it's interesting because there are some benchmarks there, and then you're naturally comparing to the industry and looking for metrics that are benchmarks. So there is, in the beginning, it's about the acquisition funnel, right? Like it's users, registered users, some sort of inbound, and then you go down the funnel with downloads, and then you go down the funnel with accounts, KYC compliant accounts. So then you have the users, but they're not using it. And then for Nomad, as I said in the beginning, we were communicating a value proposition around international traveling, and no one was traveling. So first full year, it was not about activation. It was really about establish your account, get ready for when you're going to be traveling, right? And of course, there were some who were traveling. I was, right? I was there in the US. So then, of course, we could have some activation even though you were not traveling. So you could send money. So, of course, there were multiple different users and metrics. But in the beginning, it's really all about acquisition. That was it for us. And then as soon as people started traveling, we started looking at activation of the accounts. Okay, we had a bunch of accounts. Are people really using that or not? And the activation can be measured in multiple ways. In our case, as I said, we had different products. If you send money, if you have money in the account and you're going to be making revenue out of that money float, or if you use the card. So we start having the different use cases. That has not changed much since then. Definitely after 23. So 22 was really about activation. And then 23, which was when we had our Series B, it was already about revenue. But the drivers for revenue are really the same ones there. Like you're sending money, you have your balance, AUC, plus are you using the card? So we transformed, I think, the mindset. We were looking at the same metrics, the same funnel, looking at the activation of the accounts. As we know, those are a leading indicator for the revenue, which is the number one metric for us, and it still is. Because it's a lagging indicator, right? Like the revenue is like, how can you impact revenue? It comes from these few metrics. And so that's how we evolved over time. And it was internally a clear mindset shift around, hey, we're not looking at activation of accounts only because of customer, but really, what is the revenue that we want to achieve, right? So we kind of connect those metrics back to generate the revenue. And right after Series B, we started exploring different things. So we added a few products, and so those compose our revenue. And also, one thing that I didn't mention, for us in our industry, gross profit is quite relevant as well. So it's definitely something that we measure. I would say it's the second metric for us. Since in between Series A and B is starting to be revenue and gross profit as a second metric that we tracked. But that was it. I think it depends a lot on the industry, right? In our case, for example, the pandemic, it was, of course, a context that forced us to look less at revenue and more at account activity. But over time, I think it changes with the natural course of the business, right? And it's important for you to have. That's how I think about it. It's important for you to have the mindset that it will change. It will keep changing. So that's how we did it here.
Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about brand building, because I think back to Viva, and we were like pretty bad at brand from the consumer standpoint. I remember I used to get so pissed when I'd be in a taxi and the taxi driver would know about Zap and didn't know VivaReal, and I used to just like get really mad.
Yeah.
That's kind of changed today. Like the brand is more well known, and I think we did an excellent job in brand building with the industry through our events and things like that. When you decided to build the terminal in Guarulhos, an entire VIP lounge, you're building such a different business than Viva because the trust is so important. What led to the decision to invest heavily in brand? How did you get comfortable with the ROI of it and the difficulty in measuring? And how do you think that you've done there?
Great. From the beginning, as the goal of Nomad is long term, let's long term. It's kind of a bank in the US. That's what we're building. A bank in a hard currency for a Brazilian to be able to have part of their financial net assets in a hard currency and protect against FX volatility. Volatility wipes out wealth. There has never been this access for a Brazilian to move and control and have a great portfolio. So it's long term, and we know it's the really. I've told this a few times to a few people, but basically, when we were even before we launched, when we were there talking about what's going to be the go-to-market strategy, initially the name of Nomad was not even Nomad; it was Out Invest, for Brazilians to invest outside of Brazil. So that was going to be the angle. And then if you think about the long term, hey, how do we have engagement and frequency of use, and how do we increase the activity of the customers? So hey, we're going to have long term, this is not going to be only wealth custody, this is going to be banking as well. So let's focus on transactions as well. Okay, it's going to be everything. How do we start? Oh, let's start with the transaction angle. Let's start with the banking. So let's focus on traveling. That's how we got to bank account plus card plus money transfer. And it didn't make sense to think about Out Invest as the company that is going to be helping you travel. So there comes Nomad. And then we launched. Even before we launched, we were an investment advisor registered by the SEC in the US. So we launched investment products 3 months after we launched Nomad. I think we launched the first investment product. So we have been building this in parallel. Recently, we have been extremely focused on communicating the broader value proposition. But from the beginning, we knew that trust was going to be critical. We knew that for a Brazilian to trust this fintech company with part of their wealth, branding and reputation was going to be critical. And so we were thinking about how to create that. And that thought guided multiple decisions. And the whole branding investment, it was very, very hard for us to get comfortable with what's going to be the ROI. And then we talked to multiple people. In the end, when we were running the numbers, when we thought about the business 5 years from that moment, it was going to be huge. And with that mentality, hey, if this business is going to be what we really want it to be, a VIP lounge is nothing in terms of cost, in terms of CapEx. It's nothing. Like 5 years from, like 21, early 21, first time we went to Guarulhos to talk to the airport about it. Hey, 2026, it's going to be huge. So this is going to be nothing. Let's do it. If it doesn't work, we are not going to be here. If it doesn't work, I don't even want to be here if it doesn't work.
So business doesn't exist if it's not working. So
yeah,
who cares?
So if it doesn't work, we don't want to do this to be a lifestyle business. So okay, that was the decision-making process. It was not that quick. It was not that simple, but that was the process. It's how come a startup in early 21, in the middle of the pandemic, is going to get comfortable building a VIP lounge when people are not even traveling? That was it. So of course you're not going to get comfortable. How come you're going to have a model that is going to say, hey, this is going to be generating? Of course not. The reason why we wanted to build it is because, hey, if people have to trust us, yes, they have to see. And by the way, the more you invest, it's probably going to create more impression. Hey, these people have money, right? What's this startup? Yeah, I can trust it. It's almost like the Amex. People trust Amex or Safra here in Brazil or Visa. What are the companies that have VIP lounges? Those big companies that everyone knows are reliable. So we want to build the impression here that you can trust us. Well, yeah, we are reliable. We are solid. So that was it. And can we measure now? Now we can measure more. So fast forward, 2 years later, 23 we launched. Today, it has been operating for about 18 months. So yes, we can measure activity. We can measure how many people go there. We can measure a little bit of conversion. There are multiple metrics that we can measure, but it's very hard for us to measure the ROI of to really attribute how much that contributes to the end result. So it's more. There are multiple evidences that come from different product launches, different stakeholders. How much has it helped in fundraising, for example? There are so many variables. We are 100% comfortable with the ROI now. By the way, of course, as you can imagine, and the investors, you know who are the investors. 99% of the investors were not supportive. 99%. And today, everyone is extremely happy.
What was What was the conversation? Because it takes some fortitude to be able. I think this is founder
mode, Pat.
Founder mode versus
Brian.
manager mode. Manager mode would be like, okay, investor, you know better. Founder mode would be like, hey, you know what? This is my company and I'm going to do it because I believe in it. So
yeah, exactly.
Some investors can be pretty persuasive. I mean, I remember having head-to-head conversations with the Kazakh folks on some stuff. Did they just kind of see the light, or did they just say, okay, you're the CEO? I mean, you can't really be managing, you can't be steering the ship from the shore. So I guess they realize that they're good enough investors to know that they're not going to be able to change your mind.
Yeah. I don't think they were not even close to understand the decision. And let's remember, it was 21. The world was closed. We were building a product for nothing. Everything was collapsing, and then there's a lot of cash, and then there's crisis. So I don't think they were convinced, but of course they didn't say, hey, it's up to you now, but let's see if it was not like that. It was fine. Yeah, it's a big bet.
What's the negotiation look like during COVID? Did you have like beneficial terms because of just the travel situation? Did you get in there and make a better deal than you would have under like traditional normal
with Guarulhos,
timing?
you mean?
Yeah.
I think we do have a better deal because at the time it was still, when we started negotiating, the airport was quite empty.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's hard to understand if it is a good deal or not, because we built a mezzanine from scratch, right? It's not that we had a room that now let's pay a rent with discount. It was not like that. We built everything from scratch. We said, hey, we want this to be really in the middle of the airport, in the middle of the corridor. Everyone has to see it. It has to be here, and let's do this. And so it was.
Do you ever meet any investors at the airport? They got off, or they're getting ready to leave, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it's a because they all have to go through that place, right? So that's
exactly.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
interesting.
So we have those anecdotes, right? Like investors who send a message, hey, Lucas, how have you been? We talked 6 months ago, just saw your lounge. Okay, let's connect.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. No, I think that the consumer awareness of Nomad is like, I've seen because I ask people, right? Like, I'm an investor and I'm like a fan of the business, and the general awareness of people. I mean, we used your office, right? Because you were kind enough to lend that to us, I think earlier this year. And the people we met with, like everyone that we met with knew about it, right? So it was like, they're like, oh, cool. I get to go to Nomad's office. Like, I'm a customer, or, oh, I should become a customer. So that's cool to see. And I think that classic kind of, if you build it, they will come. I think you guys had on display here with Nomad, looking at Latin America, looking at fintech. What makes you the most excited about building fintech in Latin America? What's the biggest opportunity gap aside from Nomad?
fintech is broad, right? So we have to be careful, because when we say fintech, and for Nomad, it's consumer-facing fintech, but it's broad. There are multiple different products. There's more downstream, close to the consumer, more upstream infrastructure. So it's broad. And I think it's extremely dependent on the regulatory framework in each country, in each region, and in each country. So we can see that the opportunities vary depending on how usually central banks are approaching innovation and the fintech opportunity.
And Brazil is way ahead of the game there, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I think Brazil, for multiple reasons, not only because of the regulatory framework, has been this land of crazy business like QY tech, and installments and Pix, and then and all of the opportunities that those products are also able to create. And so new opportunities unfold with the environment and with the infrastructure. So crediário and consórcio. I don't even know how to say consórcio in English. Like there are some things that are very local, but those combined with the innovations that we do with the infrastructure, with Pix, and with FIDICs, which is very domestic as well from Brazil, like the ability that you have to create a credit from credit card or whatever receivable, it's crazy. And I think we're just really in the start of the opportunities that we see here in Brazil. And at the same time, if we look at what happened in Brazil, we're going to see big changes, maybe not with peaks, but with definitely consumer finance, definitely with infrastructure and some other things. I was in India last year learning about their ecosystem. They also had their very own peaks, even before the peaks, right? The UPI there in India. It's crazy. It transformed the country. It started with identity. Like the citizens didn't have one single identity. So it started with creating identity. And then identity was important for them to have the real-time payments. And then with that, it started consumer finance. And then there's going to come wealth. So all of the countries that managed to create some infrastructure to organize, connect the players, and provide payments really had multiple waves of innovation within the fintech industry. And in Latin America, Brazil is maybe in the early days of that. Imagine all of the other countries. So it's really exciting to see what's happening here.
I love the opportunities that arise from like these government changes. Pix is an example of this. And for us in the tax space with Camus, there's a tax reform on the table. So like everything is going to kind of be reshaped. It's like a new starting point. So for me, that kind of excites me, these opportunities that arise from that. Just as a side note for the listeners that don't know Brazil, consórcio is translated to consortium in Brazil. And it refers to a financial arrangement where a group of people pool their money together to purchase, like cars or real estate through monthly contributions. So it's a totally uniquely Brazilian model. And like, if you're a global investor and you're like going to Brazil and you're like, what is this? You have to understand how like the consumer behaves or how people behave in order to identify this as an opportunity. So that's why local understanding of opportunities is so important. Look, it's really awesome to connect and catch up. I love watching from the sidelines a little bit as you build Nomad. It's fun to think back to those very early days. We're going on like year 12, 13 of our, when our partnership started, and we're both kind of obviously on our separate paths now. But I love to be able to overlap and see everything you've built. And it's just really impressive. And if you're listening to this and you're not a Nomad customer, you should be. So anyways, thanks a lot for making the time to chat.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. As you said, about 13 years now of when you think about 13 years ago, it was so different, and yeah, happy that we survived and that we're still here, excited about the next 12, 13 years. So
I don't feel 13 years older, but that's fine. That's a state of mind. Thanks, man.